100 Thieves Next was a groundbreaking effort, and it was an example of how an LCS organization can go beyond the existing structures of what an LCS team is expected to do with an LCS roster and an academy roster, and do more than that to try to get a leg up on the rest of the competition. I want to look at 3 examples of how running 100 Thieves Next benefited the organization, and talk about the size of those benefits, and get a bit of an idea of how much it was worth the investment. And I want to preface this with upfront saying I don't know how much it actually cost them financially or how much staff time they had to put in from their LCS and Academy side, but I think we can have a rough idea of that and just discuss in a more general way what kind of the cost-benefit relationship for 100 Thieves was here. So first of all, the first way that 100 Thieves Next benefited 100 Thieves is also the most obvious. Running an amateur team allowed them to discover some players because they were more intentionally looking out for the best amateur players, putting them into a roster, and seeing how much they could develop over the course of the year and learn while playing, with a coach and with a more structured environment. And the specific players that we can point at here are the ones that 100 Thieves was actually able to retain from 2020 going into 2021. So first of all, that would be their jungler, Kenvi. Kenvi might be the most exciting North American prospect we've seen in a few years, honestly. And 100 Thieves, because of putting him onto their 100 T Next team, they were able to develop him all year. And then towards the end of the year, they promoted him into Academy, had him play some games and the summer playoffs there. And that allowed them to sign a contract with him and retain his rights from 2020 going into 2021, which is something they might not have been able to do if he was in the amateur scene. Now, the rules were a little different this year than they're going to be next year, where next year, officially and formally, you're not able to have a contract with an amateur player that runs through an offseason into the following year. Those amateur or tier 3 players have to become free agents at the same time as everybody in LCS and Academy, and it can't be more than a 1-year deal. So I'm not entirely completely sure if they couldn't have signed a contract with these amateur players and continue them, but I don't believe they could. And for sure, going forward in the future, any team that wants to emulate what 100 Thieves Next did won't be able to retain an amateur player unless they promote them into Academy and sign them to an Academy contract. So they promoted Kenvi. They saw some time from him in Academy. Clearly, they saw enough from him in amateur that they were very excited and wanted to retain him and make this effort to retain him. And Kenvi is a prospect who, I don't think he's quite ready for LCS yet, but he doesn't seem that far off, and he's definitely worth continuing to work with and put him in a position to be an LCS-ready player in the relatively near future. The ability that they had to promote Kenvi into Academy and to avoid kind of any awkwardness about their existing Academy jungler, this was something that they were able to do because of the Meteos situation, where they demoted Meteos from the LCS roster and then moved on from him entirely and cut his contract and replaced him directly in Academy with Kenvi. So if it hadn't been for that Meteos situation, and I'm not going to go into all the details around that, but you can go back and find out more about what happened between 100 Thieves and Meteos. But if it wasn't for that, it would have been a lot more awkward for 100 Thieves to promote Kenvi from their amateur to their Academy team and retain him. Since they were able to just cut Meteos, now they didn't have to pay 2 junglers at the same time or have them kind of exchanging time, anything like that. So it was a situation that was really, conveniently smooth for them, and it was a big win-win for the 100 Thieves org. And I also want to acknowledge that when they were promoted Kenvi, they replaced him on the 100 Thieves Next team with NXI, who did not directly benefit them as an organization because, again, as mentioning before, they couldn't retain his contract from year to year. I don't know for sure whether or not they would have wanted to, but let's assume that they chose him for a reason. They liked the potential he had, and if they could have, they would have retained him at their amateur team. But they couldn't. He became a free agent, and he signed with FlyQuest. So moving Kenvi up, the player discovery benefits that they got from that were Kenvi himself. You didn't get a benefit from NXI moving in behind him. The second player that they really benefited from in discovering this way was Tenacity, who, like Kenvi, they promoted him to Academy on their Academy kind of roster in midsummer, even though he didn't end up playing. And there are a variety of reasons why he didn't play, but I think the number one is they already had Fake God playing in top lane. Fake God, was playing better and was a better option, I assume partly because he had been playing with the team throughout already, and I also think Fake God is further along in his development and right now is a better player than Tenacity. You might, speculate on whether, which of them will be a better player in the long run, who has a higher ceiling eventually, but Fake God has discovered more of that ceiling so far. He is right now the better player, and so they played Fake God. that was something useful, being able to promote Tenacity, because they were losing Fake God to free agency, and he has now signed with Dignitas to be their starting LCS top laner. And so having Tenacity moved up there means they get to retain him, and clearly he's a player that they saw enough from in the 100 Thieves Next organization that they wanted to be able to work with him next year. So they were able to do that without having to bid against other teams. Presumably Tenacity wanted to stay with them as well, having worked with them so far. So they got the benefit of the player discovery being earlier on talking to Tenacity and being able to sign with him and retain him. Now, this is a case where they did have to pay 2 Academy top laners at the same time for a part of the year. And that's pretty awkward. And that's something that, you have to think about, whether that financial investment of paying them both, paying one player not to play effectively, is worth the risk of him becoming a free agent. Now you have to bid against other teams to sign him, and potentially you lose him. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But it was a benefit for their talent pipeline, and it's something that helped them to discover this player. There was a second benefit beyond the player discovery, though, and that is development of their coaching staff. So they had a coach working with their 100 Thieves Next team, which was Fallen Bandit, and he was able to spend the year learning how to be a better coach, developing, and coaches themselves are a resource, in very much the same way that players are. So being able to develop a coach to teach your players better and continue to level up, because the stronger the coaches, the stronger the players they're working with can become. This is a direct value to your organization, assuming that coach stays with the organization and continues to work with you. I assume that, Fallen Bandit was able to learn a lot from the rest of the 100 Thieves coaching staff at the Academy and LCS levels. I don't know for sure who he worked with the most. I think it's pretty likely that he worked a lot with Kelsey Moser, who was the Academy head coach. But I'm sure there were opportunities to learn from Zix and the rest of their staff as well. It's worth noting here that even though they kind of benefited from this coaching development time, and it seems like Fallen Bandit will be coaching 100 Thieves Next in 2021 as well, they did not promote him to replace Kelsey, who didn't re-sign with 100 Thieves for 2021. They signed Golden Glue instead, who retired as a player and is going to become their academy coach. So it's hard to say how much the 100 Thieves org has benefited from developing Fallen Bandit as a coach. You might like to think that if he had grown enough, then they would have promoted him to become the academy coach instead of bringing Golden Glue. Maybe there's still some movement going to happen there. But at least, in theory and conceptually, they're benefiting from him improving as a coach. Maybe they just think it's so much worthwhile to have him as the amateur level coach and the development work he's doing with their next crop of players there. Or maybe they just think he needs a little more time. But as long as he's staying in the organization and improving as a coach, they are getting benefit from developing their coaching staff by having that third team. And finally, the third way that 100 Thieves have directly benefited from running their amateur team is their reputation as an organization. So by running an amateur team before any other LCS org had done this, or at least had publicly done anything like this, they became, the example of a talent developing organization. An LCS org that puts a priority on watching the amateur scene, investing into the amateur scene, bringing players up, and in theory, eventually promoting them into the LCS, in their own org or by selling them to other orgs or things like that. Gaining positive sentiment from the community is really, really valuable. It's something that you always want to have a good reputation as a company and as an organization. It might directly earn you more fans. It might, give you something that you can pitch to investors and say, hey, look, we've got really strong community sentiment. People buy into what we represent as a brand and what our values are. And so there's, it's hard to directly measure how much this is worth, but I think we can all agree that it's really, really valuable to have a strong brand and a strong perception in the community. So it's worth noting here that community sentiment is pretty fickle. You can make some big gains and then also take some steps backwards if you make some stumbles. Now, you've earned yourself a little more runway to make those mistakes by making these gains and generating these positive sentiments. But if 100 Thieves want to retain this reputation as a talent-developing organization, they're going to need to actually use the talent they've been developing. And it's only 1 year in. I don't think we would expect that running an amateur team would produce LCS players in a single year. But by 1 more year from now, or maybe two more years from now, depending how much runway you want to give them, you have to hope that players they developed in amateur are moving into either their LCS roster or being sold to other organizations and making them a financial benefit. So if they don't do that, then this player discovery, if they don't promote the coaches they've been developing, these are potential values to the organization. The reputation is going to stick around as long as they actually continue to make these efforts. But the player discovery and the coach development, these are potential pieces of value to the organization that they're building up a resource, but they have to, realize that final value from the resource in order for it to actually pay off and in order for that reputation to stick for the long term. So all of this being said, those are 3 ways that 100 Thieves have benefited. I think in all 3 cases, you can say, look, they've started to build up something good. The benefits aren't quite as, clear and direct as you might think they are on the surface, but there's something here, and they're definitely working towards something and gaining some things. And it's also worth pointing out that outside of the direct benefits to 100 Thieves themselves, there are benefits, things that they've achieved for North America as a whole in the League of Legends ecosystem there. So the fact that they ran this amateur team, it inspired changes in the North American ecosystem for 2021 and beyond. I don't think we ascribe the entirety of this Academy amateur shuffle with, all the tournament circuit and all of that and the crossplay between Academy and amateur. We're not going to say 100 Thieves Next caused all of that, right? But I think it influenced it and it played into it for sure. It's inspiring more LCS orgs, I think, to follow that example and to run teams like that, and invest more effort into amateur scouting and not just kind of see who pops up elsewhere and recycle other talent or wait for recruit players off word of mouth and things like that. I think there's more effort by not just 100 Thieves themselves but others following their example to be actually intentional about scouting and identifying amateur talent that's coming up. And when more orgs from the LCS are investing and more structure from the LCS itself is coming in to create opportunities to invest in those players, that's really, really good for the amateur players themselves. It gives them more opportunities to compete with higher level competition and learn from it, to be coached, to compete in an organized team environment. That's really good for the ecosystem as a whole, which does, come back around and benefit 100 Thieves by having more good players to choose from. But it also benefits the rest of the league and all the other teams who they also have more good players to choose from. So it is worth absolutely acknowledging that the 100 Thieves effort here has benefited everybody and not only themselves. So I would say to kind of wrap this all up, 100 Thieves Next was a success as a project, and I hope it will continue to be a success because of the benefits they've had for player discovery, which we've seen in Kenvi and Tenacity, the benefits for coach development, and the ways that it's generated positive reputation and community sentiment. But I also just want to again acknowledge that those gains were probably smaller in the direct gains, at least, than they might have seemed on the surface, and that positive reputation is being built up to something really, really big and exciting. But it probably doesn't do quite as much for 100 Thieves, and we're going to have to wait another year or two to see that project's real value fully realized. If 100 Thieves are really committed to the kind of the altruistic side of this project and the way it benefits the ecosystem as a whole, even though it's good for other teams just as well as being good for themselves, then they're going to continue running this project not just in 2021, but 2022 and beyond. And it's going to become a long-term investment. I absolutely hope that happens. I hope that they get to realize, the full potential of the benefits they're working towards so that they can feel rewarded for their effort, because I do think that their investment is really good for everybody. It's really good for North America. And I hope more LCS organizations will think of it the same way that 100 Thieves are, where it's not just about direct and immediate gains for themselves, but what's good for the entire scene and what's good for them 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. I really hope that 100 Thieves will continue this program long term, and I hope more LCS organizations will follow them in making that investment. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think of my take. If nobody ever disagreed with what I was saying, it wouldn't be worth putting out there. So I want to hear from you whether you like what I was saying, whether you think I got it wrong somewhere. Either way, let's have that conversation. Make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. It really does help the channel grow a lot, so I appreciate it.